So, dear students, today our topic is about the biomacromolecules, their compositions, and the organizations. So, now firstly, we discuss what are the biomacromolecules. So, the biomacromolecules are the large molecules essential for life formed by the combination of smaller units, which we call the monomers. So, biomacromolecules also play a crucial role in various biological processes. There are the four major types of the biomacromolecules. So, we will discuss one by one all these four biomacromolecules. So, these are the four biomacromolecules such as the carbohydrates, proteins, nucleic acids, and lipids. So firstly, we will discuss about what are the carbohydrates and what are their compositions, organizations, and the function. So on the basis of composition, carbohydrates are primarily composed of the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atom. So this is the general diagram of the carbohydrates, which consist of the carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms, which make a monomer diagram. So what is the monomers? So carbohydrates which are having the single entity is known as the monomer. So the monomer which we call the monosaccharides, for example glucose and fructose is the monosaccharides, right? So this general diagram show the picture of the fructose and the glucose, which is the monosaccharides. Monosaccharides mean one and single chain of the carbohydrates. Now all these monomers when combined with each other, so they make the organization of the carbohydrates, which we call the polysaccharides. Poly means many and saccharides mean the chain of the carbohydrates. So the common examples of the polysaccharides are the starch, cellulose, and the glycogen. Basically, they are formed by linking the monomers of multimonosaccharides together with a specific linkage bonds. So this diagram represents that carbohydrates have been divided into the simple carbohydrate and the complex carbohydrate. So the simple carbohydrates consist of the monosaccharides, mono means single, and the disaccharides meaning two combinations of the glucose molecules. So the monosaccharides, the example of the monosaccharides are the glucose, fructose, and the galactose, while the example of the disaccharides are the maltose, lactose, and the sucrose. So when then monosaccharides combine with each other, then they make the large chain of the polysaccharide, which consists of the starch, fibers, and the glycogen molecules. So this is the general diagram of the carbohydrates, which are the monosaccharides and the disaccharides or the polysaccharides. So we can discriminate between these two types on the basis of their definition. For example, monosaccharides are the simple sugar molecule, while disaccharides are the complex carbohydrate. Monosaccharides are single unit while disaccharides are long chain of the monosaccharides. Monosaccharides are the sweet taste and soluble in water. For example, glucose in water, your glucose, fructose and the galactose. While disaccharides are not soluble in water while less solution of water. For example, starch, glycogen and the cellulose is the example of the polysaccharides. Now there are some functions of the carbohydrates. So the first function of the carbohydrates are the energy storage. For example, it starch and glycogen is the example of the carbohydrate which store the energy in the plants and animals. The structural support, for example, cellulose give the structural supports to the plant cell. Cell recognition, for example, cell membrane consists of the glycoproteins and the glycolipids will help for the recognition and act as a receptors for different ligands molecule. So there are general functions of the carbohydrate. The first function is that it help in the energy source, act as an energy source, energy storage, structure composition, cell recognition, and also the biomolecules precursor or different biomolecule synthesis will be done by the carbohydrates and also helpful for the digestive health. So now we discuss the second biomacromolecule on the basis of the composition. So proteins are composed of the amino acids. So amino acids are the single monomer of the protein, each containing an amino acids group. For example, it consists of the three atoms, amino groups, carboxyl groups, and the hydrogen atoms and a side chain. So it's mean the compositions of the proteins consist of these four elements. So, for example, the monomer of the protein is the amino acid, the center is the carbon atom. It, along with the oxygen, hydrogen group, nitrogen group, and alkyl group, are attached, which may be create the any example of the amino acids. So, the general amino acid structures is the building block for the protein synthesis. The center is the alpha carbon, which consists with the carbonyl groups and also the amino groups, hydrogen atom, and variable side chains, which is the alkyl group. So to make the organizations of the protein, these amino acids bind with each other and make a complex 3D structure of the protein, which include the primary structure, the secondary structure, and the tertiary and the quaternary level of the proteins. So the primary structure of the protein is the long chain of the amino acids, which are linked together by the peptide bonds. The second structure, when these peptide bonds make a complex structure like the alpha helix and the beta sheets, which are bound by the hydrogen bonding of the amino acids. Third, it also make the tertiary structure where they make a complex structure by the disulfide bond, disbonding bonds, ionic bonds, and the hydrogen bonds make a tertiary structure of the protein. So this make the organization of the protein more complex. So now we discuss what is the function of the proteins. So the main function of the protein is the enzymes. All proteins are enzyme in nature and act as a catalyst for different reactions in the body. Second, it having the structural proteins, for example, collagen and keratin, having the structural protein which give the skin and the hair a strongest texture. Third, it have helped through the transport protein. For example, hemoglobin act as a carrier in the blood, and hormones and antibodies is the function of the proteins. So now we discuss again the different functions of the protein in the human body in this worksheet of life. The first function is that it helpful for the structural support and also for the sensing, movements, transports, defense mechanism, and different reactions will be take place with the help of these protein in the human body. So now we discuss the third biomacromolecule, which is the nucleic acids. So on the basis of the composition, they are composed of the nucleotides. So each containing a sugar, that is the ribose and deoxyribose, and a phosphate group and a nitrogenous basis. So to make the monomer of the nucleic acid, the monomer is the nucleotide which are consist of the four elements: the nitrogenous basis, the pentose sugar, the phosphate group, and other one is the different nitrogenous basis are making the monomer of the nucleic acids. So how the organization will be take place? For example, DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is the double helical structure, while RNA, which is the ribonucleic acid, is usually a single strand of the DNA. So all the nucleotides combine with each other and make the organization of the nucleic acid, which is called the DNA and the RNA. So this is the general structures of the DNA, where the two letters are coiled around each other and making the DNA structure. So this structure define that the center part is the different nitrogenous bases attached, such as the adenine, guanine, cytosine, and the thymine. They are attached by the hydrogen bonding, while the side of the ladders are made up of the sugar and the phosphate backbone. So this join the nucleotides with each other and make the double helical structure of the DNA. Now the main function of the nucleic acid is that it store the genetic information. Like the DNA have the ability to store all the genetic information, while RNA is involved in the gene expression and for the protein synthesis. So the main function of the nucleic acids is that so the DNA have the ability of replication, mean it make the copy of the itself. They have the ability of transcription. For example, DNA transcribe into mRNA and mRNA transcribe into the protein. They have the ability of the translation to make the long chain amino acids in the body. It also help for the gene regulation. For example, protein synthesis gene help to regulate the gene, and they also contain the hereditary information for the inheritance that consists of the different types of the DNA. After that, now we discuss the four biomacromolecule, which is the lipids. So on the basis of the composition, lipids are primarily composed of the carbon, hydrogen and oxygen atom, but with a higher proportion of the carbon and hydrogens compared to the carbohydrates. So the main monomer of the lipids are the fatty acids. So in this picture it has been shown that the fatty acid and glycerols are the monomers. The example is shown in the cell membrane of the cell structure. For example, the cell membrane consists of the two layers, lipid bilayers that consist with the head and tail roots, and it make the phospholipid molecule of the cell membrane. So it's mean that the monomer of the lipid is the fatty acid. So, on the basis of the organizations, lipids are generally hydrophobic. Hydrophobic terminology can be defined as those that are water hating and having a diverse range of the structures. For example, they have a different examples of the structure. They may be the triglycerides, phospholipids, steroids, and waxes are the example of the lipids. So the main function of the lipids, again, just like the carbohydrate, they store the energy. They act as an insulation. The cell membrane components signaling molecule, for example, hormones, make a basic function in the human body. So the main function of the lipid, again discussed. The main function is that they act for the cell membrane. For example, the structural components are consist of the lipids. All the vitamin D's or hormones are made up of the lipids. Lipid also help for the protections in the plant cell. It give the insulation. For example, inside our human body there are cytoskeleton structure, which is the myelin sheets, and give insulation inside the human body. It have also the energy storing capacity. For example, triglycerides store the energy in human body. So now we discussed that the organizations of the biomacromolecule is crucial for their function. For example, the specific sequence of amino acids in a protein determines its 3D structure and functions. The basic sequence in DNA encoding genetic information. The arrangement of fatty acid and glycerol lipids affects their properties and role in cell membrane. It's mean that the organization is most complex in human body, and little bit difference in their organization can lead to the different disorders or the disease. So these are all about the four biomacromolecules on the basis of their organizations, monomers and functions. Thank you so much.